Hello, and welcome back to Let's Get Lit. In today's video, we're going to be going over The Knight's Tale Part 3 and 4. Are you guys ready to see what happens to Arcite, to Palamon, who's going to win Emily's hand, and much more? Let's dive into it right now. Part 3 of The Knight's Tale begins with the narrator telling us about the theater that was erected for Theseus, for the great battle that was to come. The narrator tells us just how large it was, and that there was no greater spectacle on earth at that time. He talks about how large it was, how it was built in a complete circle like a compass, and that there were even 3 temples devoted to 3 different gods and goddesses. The first temple was attributed to Venus, being that Venus is the goddess of love, and that the entire fight and quarrel was over the love of a woman. The narrator goes in to talk about all the different types of scenes and images that were depicted from famous moments throughout history, and one being the painting of Venus and Cupid and the depiction of him. The second temple was to honor the god Mars. The narrator describes the inside of this temple being painted with huge images of famous moments throughout history depicting war and bloodshed. Nero, Julius, Antinius, all were pictured being killed, and other famous wars and bloodshed. Also in this painting there is a large depiction of Mars up on a chariot in all of his stature. And we can also see the 2 children that find Rome from the classic myth. The third temple is to honor the goddess Diane. Inside of this temple there are many depictions of the famous stories that she's a part of. Images including one of when she was turned into a bear. We also see her painted, seated on a high hearth with little dogs around her feet, and under her feet was a full moon. The image shows her in green clothing and arrow cases and a bow in hand. The narrator then jumps back to the story at hand, and it's almost been a year since Theseus set up the game. The narrator talks about Palamon and how he's gone out to find his army, and that he was able to have 100 knights help him in this fight. The narrator talks about how all of the knights had the finest weapons and shields, and this helped Palamon come back looking like a king. He had hounds and fancy clothes, and he was even wearing a crown, and the narrator even mentions the amount of hounds that were around him. After the depiction of Palamon, the narrator goes on to talk about Arcite. He describes Arcite in all of his wondrous glory, how he looked like the god Mars coming in from battle, how he wore the finest clothes, his hair was gorgeous, how his eyes were full of love. The narrator also talks about how his voice had deepened and how he guesses his age to be about 25. The narrator then describes what he wore and how it was made out of the finest of things. The narrator goes on that a Sunday afternoon, everybody comes into the city to gather at Theseus's palace. Here at the palace, he has also had dinner prepared for everyone on both parties. There was the finest of foods and entertainment and women, all of which spoke freely of love, and how everyone had a great time. The next morning, Palamon gets up thinking he has heard the songbird. However, he realizes that there's still a few more hours until daylight. He gets up and goes to the Temple of Venus. There, he asks a very simple prayer, and that is to please let him win so he can have Emily as his wife. If not, let Arcite slay him down quickly so that way he won't be able to remember all the pain. He then offers a sacrifice in all of the right ways and of pure heart. The temple shakes a little bit after this offering and sacrifice, and Palamon takes this as a good sign. Next, the narrator talks about Emily and how she gets up with her maids and goes to the altar of Diane. She bathes herself in well water and cleans her body and her hair. She also makes a prayer to Diane because she doesn't want to be wed to either of these men. She asks Diane to protect her and to bless her, and hopefully turn their attentions elsewhere. After this prayer, the fire on the altar begins to die and comes back. Soon, Diana the Huntress is in front of Emily and gives her a message. The message being that written above in the heavens, she shall be married to one of the 2 brothers. However, Diane cannot tell her she's going to be married to. After this, Emily goes back to her house. Next, we see Arcite and how he's arrived at the Temple of Mars. We learn that Arcite sends a prayer up to Mars, asking for him to watch over him and give him strength, and help him win Emily's hand. Arcite also performs all the sacrificial rituals as intended and with pure heart, and when he does this, the chamber begins to rattle, and he swears he can hear a low voice whisper victory. After this moment, Arcite runs back to the inn where he is staying. Immediately after all this happens, a great battle begins between all the gods. Saturn then comes in and talks to Venus. He reminds her of his strength and of all the great things that happen due to his hand. He also tells her that he will make sure that Palamon shall have his lady as Venus promised. Saturn also says that eventually there must be peace between Mars and Venus. After this, the narrator says that now it is on to the moment everyone's been waiting for. And so, Part 3 of The Knight's Tale ends. Part 4 of The Knight's Tale begins with the narrator telling us that everyone the next morning was getting ready for the tournament. All 100 people on each side grabbed their shields and swords and weapons and everything to prepare. Later, once everyone is ready, the king lays down the rules, and he says no one is going to die today under his watch. He states that with the tournament, if someone is seriously hurt, they should be taken to either side of the stadium and rest. Whichever knight is struck first and is hurt is the loser. The other one will have Emily's hand in marriage. The narrator goes on to say that the battle is beginning and both teams come out onto the field swinging. The narrator notes that the two teams could not have been better equally matched, and both were very impressive. The tournament begins and the narrator describes everything that's going on. Those who are hurt, those who hurt others, and now how throughout the fight many people were taken to either side, but true to the word, no one dies. And the thickest of everything, Palamon is struck on the side by one of Arcite's knights. He is then taken off the field, and the king declares the winner to be Arcite. Venus, who is saddened by this fight because she promised to help Palamon, turns to Saturn. Then, by divine intervention, Saturn causes the ground to shake, which scares one of Arcite's horses, and the horse tramples on Arcite and seriously hurts him. He is then taken back to the palace to rest and regain strength. All of the other knights who have fought in this battle also go back and remedy their wounds, but luckily, no one dies from this. For the next 3 days, all of the knights eat together, make merriment, and everyone is tending to their wounds. After the 3 days, all the knights go out and set forth back home. While everyone leaves to go home, Arcite, unfortunately, is not doing well. They try everything from potions to laxatives to remedies to leeches, and nothing is helping Arcite get better. He gets so bad that he knows he's about to die, so he brings in Emily and brings in Palamon and the king for his final words. He lets Emily know that he's not going to live long and will die very soon, and that if she should be a wife, Palamon should be the man that she marries. He says that though they have fought for many years over her, there would be no one better than Palamon to be her husband. After he says this, he then dies in Emily's arms. The narrator notes that he cannot tell where Arcite's soul went after that because he's not a diviner, nor does he care to dabble in any of those sort of ideals. Next, the narrator goes on to talk about Emily and how she then goes into mourning for the loss of Arcite. The narrator then goes into the mourning for a few days. Theseus also contemplates on where to have Arcite's funeral, where it should be, the best of the most fitting places, and he decides that he's going to have Arcite's funeral in the same field that he found him in, where he found him and Palamon fighting those many years ago. The day comes for the funeral and the king gathers all the townspeople and everyone in a very sad state. The narrator notes how they get everything ready for the fire and how everyone has gathered around, exactly what they bury Arcite in, and all of the niceties that it consists of. Then it is time for the funeral. They begin the traditions going into the burning of the body, along with people throwing in all types of milk and honey and blood and other things, and he describes how very sad it was for everyone. The narrator then says that after the funeral, all of the other Greek traditions were upheld, and after a while, King Theseus calls Emily and Palamon back to the castle. While there, the king makes a great speech about Arcite and how great of a man he was. He goes into his speech to talk about how every man will die at some point, and what truly matters is the life that they've lived while on earth. How if people are to die, then they should be remembered for the great things that they did. He then says that they shouldn't end with sorrow, but with merriment. So he asks for Emily's hand and for Palamon's hand, and says that they both should be wedded with everything. He asks Emily to take Palamon to be her husband and to have pity. The two end up getting married, and the narrator says that neither of them ever had strife against each other or jealousy, and they lived the rest of their days together. This is where the Knight's Tale ends. Tune in next time as we go over another tale from the Canterbury Tales. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed this episode. Please like, share, and subscribe. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, stay lit.